She was 17 years old, pregnant, and trying to find a way out. She had reported him to police. She was living in a hostel for women escaping domestic violence. She had told the staff he was aggressive. She had told her mother she wanted things to change. She was trying, in every way available to her, to find a path forward. On December 3, 2013, she left the hostel to meet him. She never came back. What investigators found when they eventually located her body was something British police had never encountered before in a murder case, and it told them everything they needed to know about the kind of man they were dealing with. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications if you're new here, because this case led directly to a change in UK law, and Jayden's mother has spent the years since her daughter's death fighting to make sure no other family goes through what hers did. Let's go back to the beginning. Jayden Parkinson was born September 26, 1996, in Folkestone, in the United Kingdom. She was the youngest of 3 children. Her parents' relationship was difficult, and Jayden grew up witnessing things that children shouldn't have to see. When she was 7, her parents divorced. She lived primarily with her father, but remained very close to her mother Samantha. They spoke on the phone every night, a ritual that held through the years of distance between them. Adolescence was turbulent. Her father gave her a great deal of freedom, and she fell in with a crowd where smoking and drinking became part of her life earlier than they should have. When she was 13, she made her way to her mother and asked to live with her. The family court agreed. Samantha took her in, hoping the stability of her home would help. But Jayden was a complicated teenager in the way that many teenagers who've carried adult weight since childhood are complicated. She chafed against rules, argued with teachers, ran away occasionally. She was not a bad person. She was a young person who had never been given a stable enough foundation and was still trying to find one. When she was 14, she met Ben Blakely. He was 20 years old. Ben Blakely was 5 years older than Jayden when they met, and the relationship began the way controlling relationships often begin, with attention, tenderness, the feeling of being chosen. Samantha had concerns about the age gap, but there was nothing she could do. Jayden was 15 when they officially began dating. Ben was 20. Over time, what had looked like devotion revealed itself as something else entirely. Ben began managing every detail of Jayden's life. He decided what she could wear. He forbade her from wearing makeup. He cut her off from her friends one by one and then from her family. He took her phone from her so she couldn't communicate with people he hadn't approved. He monitored her social media accounts, controlling what she could say and to whom. He forbade her from speaking to other men. His control intensified. Jayden was seen multiple times with bruises on her face. He stopped her attending school. He told her that all she needed in the world was him, his love, his presence, his approval. At some point, his control became so absolute that he forbade her from leaving her room to use the bathroom. She was forced to urinate into a plastic bottle. He was dating other young women behind her back, applying the same patterns of psychological and physical control to them. Jayden, isolated and dependent, had no means of seeing clearly what was happening to her because the very relationships and perspectives that could have helped her see it had been systematically removed. Her mother went from speaking to her every night to once or twice a month. Each time they spoke, Samantha asked her to come home, to leave Ben, to get out. Jayden refused. She was, as the judge would later describe in court, obsessed with her violent abuser in the way that people who have been methodically isolated and controlled can become obsessed, unable to emotionally separate from the person who has become their entire world, because he had made himself their entire world deliberately. Eventually, Jayden left her mother's home and moved into a hostel for women experiencing domestic violence. Ben was prohibited from entering the hostel. He continued to control her from outside it. He called, he monitored, he dictated. He argued with her through whatever access he could maintain. The hostel staff saw the bruises. They heard about the aggression. Jayden told them he was dangerous, and yet the connection between them held, because it had been constructed specifically to hold under pressure, because he had removed everything else and left himself as the only remaining anchor in her world. On November 30, 2013, Jayden called her mother. She was pregnant. She told Samantha she hoped the baby would change things, that it would bring Ben back to who he had been at the beginning, that it would strengthen their bond, that he would finally choose her and choose the life they could build together. Samantha asked her to come home. Jayden said no. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to cause any more problems. When she told Ben she was pregnant, his response was rage. He told her the child wasn't his. He threatened to share intimate photographs and videos of her on social media, approximately 30 photographs and 13 videos he had accumulated. He used them as leverage, as a weapon, another instrument of control. A few days before she disappeared, Jayden went to police and reported him. She was afraid he would follow through on the threat. Then, on December 3, 2013, she left the hostel to meet him. She didn't come back that night. The hostel staff contacted Samantha. Samantha didn't know where she was. Just after midnight on December 4th, a missing persons report was filed. Investigators tried to reach Ben Blakely immediately. He was aggressive on the phone and hung up repeatedly, claiming he had no idea where Jayden was and couldn't help. He was unhelpful in the deliberate way that people who know exactly what happened to someone can afford to be unhelpful when they don't believe they've left enough evidence behind. It happened to be that same day, December 4th, that Ben was separately brought to a police station by another team of officers. Jayden had filed the complaint about the intimate photos being threatened. The officers who processed him in connection with that complaint were unaware that the missing persons investigation was looking for Ben as a person of interest. He denied planning to post the photos online and was released on bail. Samantha was distributing flyers and posting on social media, desperately trying to reach anyone who might have seen Jayden or known where she was. Police pulled CCTV footage from the hostel and surrounding area. It showed Jayden leaving to meet Ben on December 3rd. She never returned. Further footage tracked them to Oxford railway station, the two of them walking in together, nothing visibly wrong. Records confirmed they boarded a train to Didcot, about 10 miles from Oxford. The last footage showed both of them leaving Didcot station. The footage showed Ben returning to the station alone. Nobody had seen Jayden alive after that. On December 10th, Ben Blakely was arrested. In an interview, he was confident and dismissive. He referred to Jayden as his ex-girlfriend, a linguistic distancing that was notable given everything that followed. He said they had split up and she had moved on to someone else. He said he didn't know where she was and didn't care because they were done. He told police to look at her social media. He gave them nothing. He was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. Then a taxi driver from Didcot came forward. Around 1 a.m. on December 4th, he said, he had picked up a young man from a dirt road in the countryside. The man had a large, heavy suitcase, so heavy that he couldn't lift it himself, and asked the driver to help him load it into the car. The suitcase was splattered with mud. Investigators established that the taxi had been called using Ben Blakely's mobile phone. When confronted, Ben refused to answer further questions. Cell phone location records placed Ben at several locations in Didcot on the night in question, including near an abandoned barn in the countryside. The barn was close to where the taxi driver had been called to collect his passenger. Investigators went to the barn with forensic teams and trained search dogs, dogs specifically trained to detect human remains. The dogs signaled inside the barn. Jayden's body was not there. Near the barn, police found a bracelet matching one Jayden had been wearing. The suitcase had been somewhere. The body had been somewhere. But it wasn't at the barn anymore. A public appeal went out. Had anyone seen a man carrying a large, heavy suitcase in the Didcot countryside? On December 14th, investigators found Ben Blakely's grandmother's home. She lived near the abandoned barn. Ben's younger brother Jake, 17 years old, who had been Jayden's friend before she met Ben, who had been the person through whom Jayden had met Ben in the first place, lived there too. When police knocked on the grandmother's door, her first words were, "Are you here about the suitcase?" She told them that Ben had come to her home in a hurry days earlier and asked for a suitcase. He had dumped its contents on the floor without explaining anything and taken it with him. He had returned it 2 days later and thrown it in the barn. It was dirty when he brought it back. She also mentioned that 2 shovels had gone missing from the property and had recently returned to their original location. They were covered in fresh dirt. Jake Blakely was arrested on suspicion of complicity. The suitcase was sent to the laboratory. Police assessed that Jayden had been killed in or near the barn, placed in the suitcase, and transported by taxi by the man who couldn't lift it himself to another location where she had been buried. The surrounding countryside was vast. Finding a burial site in those fields seemed an enormous task. Police used aerial photography to identify 10 locations where the soil surface had been recently and significantly disturbed. They began working through the list. Before they reached the final locations, something changed. Jake Blakely began cooperating with police. He told them to check his uncle's grave. The cemetery beside All Saints Church in Didcot was on the list but near the bottom because changes in soil surface in cemeteries are not unusual. The grave is a place where the earth has always been disturbed. Ben and Jake Blakely's uncle had been buried there in 2006. Police cordoned off the cemetery. Forensic experts erected a tent over the gravesite and began their work. Inside his uncle's grave in the ground where a family member already lay, they found Jayden Parkinson. She was naked. Her clothing could not be found. Her jewelry had been removed. The forensic examination confirmed she had been beaten before her death. Finger marks on her neck were consistent with manual strangulation. The pathologist's conclusion was asphyxiation. She had been strangled to death. British police had never encountered a case in which a murder victim had been buried inside an existing grave. It was the first of its kind in the United Kingdom. In prison while awaiting trial, Ben Blakely changed his approach. After speaking with the prison chaplain, he and his lawyer composed a letter in which he admitted responsibility for Jayden's death, but insisted it was not premeditated. According to his account, he and Jayden had argued. He pushed her. She fell from a bridge near the barn. He tried to revive her and couldn't. He buried her initially in one location, then moved the body to the cemetery. The autopsy did not support this account. There were no injuries consistent with a fall from a bridge. Her face had been injured with blunt force. She had been strangled. Ben Blakely was describing a version of events designed to reduce his culpability while providing an explanation for the burial, and the physical evidence contradicted him directly. The trial began on June 23, 2014. The 4-week hearing was marked, repeatedly, by Blakely's conduct in the dock. He shouted at the prosecutor. He swore in front of the jury and the judge. He had to be warned multiple times. The rage and contempt that had defined his relationship with Jayden, the aggression that had always been there, beneath whatever tenderness he had initially performed, was on full display in the courtroom. His outbursts became so severe that on one occasion he was removed to the cells and the trial continued in his absence. His behavior was too much for Jayden's mother and family members to bear. They left the courtroom in tears on multiple occasions. 3 of Ben's previous girlfriends testified. They described the same patterns: phones taken, movement controlled, physical violence when he suspected cheating or when they answered back. He would grab them by the throat. He would hit them. He would burn and beat and starve to enforce his authority. The prosecutor told the jury that the crime had been premeditated. Blakely had deliberately taken Jayden to an isolated location in a different town where no one would witness what he intended to do. She was pregnant and trying to end the relationship. He had lost his ability to control her. He could not allow her to leave. The jury deliberated for 20 hours and returned a majority verdict 11-1. Ben Blakely was found guilty of murdering Jayden Parkinson. Judge Patrick Eccles addressed him directly at sentencing. He said, "You took Jayden Parkinson, a complicated but loving and vulnerable 17-year-old girl, into the open countryside near Upton in the dark of an early winter's evening. You strangled her to death." The judge described the control Blakely had exercised throughout their relationship, taking her phone, forbidding her from leaving her room, forcing her to urinate in a bottle, cutting her off from every person who might have reached her or helped her. He said Jayden had been obsessed with her violent abuser in a way that made it almost impossible for her to emotionally separate from him. And he said that she had finally found the courage in November 2013, after the threats about the photographs, to try to end it. Ben Blakely was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. Jake Blakely received 3 years for perverting the course of justice. He had been paid by his older brother with the promise of an Xbox and £100 to help bury what Ben told him were weapons or dead animals. Whether Jake fully understood what he was actually burying remained a matter of dispute. Jayden Parkinson's father died of heart problems before the trial began. He never saw justice for his daughter. Samantha Shrewsbury has spent the years since Jayden's death fighting for change. She supported the creation of a domestic violence register, a public database that would allow people to check whether a partner had a history of violence, accessible not just to police and social services, but to everyone. In an interview with Sky News, she said, "I don't want another mum to have to stand there and look at their daughter's body on a slab. I'll never forget it until the day I die." She talked about the years she had spent trying to reach Jayden and being unable to. She talked about the times she had seen Ben punch her daughter in the face and spit on her. and the times Jayden had still gone back to him. She talked about the institutional failures that had allowed him access to Jayden even after the pattern was visible, the legal framework that said once Jayden was 16, it didn't matter where she was, and that police didn't have to tell her mother anything. When she was murdered, she was classified as a child. Where does that get lost? She said she was angry with the government. She said girls had been hurt before Jayden. She said if a public register had existed, his history would have been visible, and Jayden might be sitting beside her now with her grandchild. If I can prevent one girl from dying and one mother from feeling the way I do, Jayden's death will not be in vain. Jayden Parkinson was 17 years old. She had a complicated childhood and a complicated adolescence, and the people who loved her knew that those complications were not who she was, they were what had happened to her. She called her mother every night for years. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone's little sister. She met a man who recognized her vulnerability and used it to build a prison around her. He took her phone, her clothes, her freedom, her relationships, her sense of herself. When she became pregnant and tried to find a way forward, he decided she was not allowed to leave. He took her to a barn in the countryside in the dark and strangled her. He put her in his grandmother's suitcase and called a taxi. He put her in his uncle's grave, and then he went home. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, you know what to do. New cases every week. We'll see you in the next one.